I guess my question is, so, a place like Australia, okay, they had very, very strict lockdown policies for a long time. They did successfully prevent the virus from circulating for a while, but now it's circulating like crazy. I mean, basically, right?
Right.
And so, given this reality, what can they expect at this point? Because they've been told, the population has been told that we won, we had the right policy, and now.
Well, every country says we have the right policy because they're in control of the microphone, right? I think Sweden is the only one that actually has some semblance of claim to that. Maybe North Dakota, or is it South Dakota? Places that didn't really lock down. I think that what we know is that in spite of bad policy, these medications still work, that people who may have been vaccinated or not and are getting COVID and are having serious COVID can still and should be treated with hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and the other medications ASAP after they become symptomatic. You get people like Tony Fauci, who got COVID after his 4th booster, so a lot of good his boosters did. Well, of course, he didn't run to the hospital because claiming that the boosters helped for that, so he got symptomatic COVID, treated himself with Paxlovid. That didn't work well enough, and he had Paxlovid Rebound, which made his second bout of COVID more symptomatic and harder to get through than the first one.
And just very quickly, what is Paxlovid Rebound?
Somewhere between 10 and 15% of people who are treated for COVID with Paxlovid, if they're only treated for 5 to 7 days, that after a few more days, that percentage of people will have the infection recurs. That it doesn't completely go away. There's enough of the infectious virus still in the person that when the Paxlovid is stopped, that virus regrows and becomes a second symptomatic infection, and in many instances, is more symptomatic, harder to tolerate than the original one that the Paxlovid treated. Now, the FDA never approved Paxlovid for a second course. It approved it for a 5 or 7 day course, and that's the official approval. So to use it twice, or to use it for 10 days or something, is off-label, right? Not approved for that. And nevertheless, that's what people have been doing, I think. Whereas had they used hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and all the other things that we know work, they could have done that from the beginning, cost them $20 instead of $700 or whatever Paxlovid costs, and would have worked as well or better. And in general, does not lead to rebound as long as those medications are used until symptoms disappear.
So it's interesting that you mention off-label, because, from what I understand, the vast majority of drugs are actually used off-label, but this has sort of become some sort of anathema in the popular consciousness.
Right, this is another plausibility argument, that off-label means unproven. Well, of course, it's unproven because doctors find lots of things work for various uses that were never contemplated originally and never had large randomized $10 million trials to show that they worked. And doctors are not going to say, oh, I can't use it because it's never been proven. They use it because they've had massive personal experience in treating patients with these drugs that work for them. That's how medicine works. That's how medicine has always worked. And this is how individualized medicine works, when the doctor is treating the patient and not treating a policy, so to speak, a protocol from the hospital or a medical group says you can only use these medications for this outcome, when doctors know what they've been using their whole careers. And so it's a false assumption to say that everything must be used on label or not, that drugs are freely available to be used off label, and the doctor and the patient take the risk, and mainly the doctor, because if it didn't work, the doctor would have risk of being sued for something that didn't work out. But that rarely happens because doctors have experience knowing that these things work. Or they inform the patients that maybe there's only a 30% chance that this will work, but it's worth a try if you think that you want to take that risk. That's informed consent. That's how the practice of medicine should work.
We live in an era of censorship and disinformation, and it can be really hard to know what's true and what's false in this information climate. To get honest information and insights you can trust, join us on Epoch TV. You can sign up for your 14-day free trial at ept.ms/epoch. ept.ms/free trial Jan. That's ept.ms/free trial JAN. How much do you think this growth of the administrative state that we discussed a little bit earlier is connected to this weird centralization of basically medical procedure?
Well, I think that, maybe if I could philosophize, I think our whole society is stuck on trying to document everything and trying to claim that everything's objective, when in real life, in the professions, there's still a lot of subjectivity. And I think that it's very hard to be confident that when you go to a doctor and the doctor's making a diagnosis because his subconscious is telling him that this looks like it fits a pattern of this kind of disease and not that kind of disease, even though if I really had to quantify it, I have to run 20 biochemical tests and do these invasive procedures to prove that what my hunch is telling me is likely. I think that level of subjectivity feels uncomfortable to people now, whereas we trusted doctors before. And it's a lack of trust in our society that's causing the urge to documentation for proof of everything. And I think that's a problem, that if you can't trust doctors or you can't trust professionals, you rely on objective proof instead, and that kind of subverts the whole body of knowledge in a field that's gained from the expertise. Why professions are professional. It's not because they went to school and got a degree and suddenly they're stamped out and know how to do everything. That, it comes with a lot of is professional experience that builds. There are better doctors and worse doctors. The better doctors have more nuance and understanding of their fields from long experience and understanding which things worked and which didn't in subtle ways that matter to patients and provide, more likelihood of better outcomes that are very hard to quantify.
But it kind of becomes a vicious cycle, doesn't it? Because on the other hand, there is this lack of trust, but after these 2 years, a lot of people say this lack of trust has been earned, because of a lot of decrees, a lot of, being told things are one way, turns out they're a different way, policies changing without reasonable explanation. And frankly, there was this recent congressional testimony from Deborah Birx where she's, as far as I can tell, she said we kind of did it on a hunch. I mean, those are my words.
She said we hoped it would work.
Right.
Right. We made a policy hoping that it would work. Well, right. There should be a lot of mistrust, in institutional mistrust, government mistrust, agencies mistrust. However, at a personal level, if your doctor told you, when you asked the doctor because you were sick with COVID and would you prescribe hydroxychloroquine, and the doctor said to you, I'd rather you die than I prescribed you hydroxychloroquine, you got a problem there. There's a problem for the doctor in the medical field. There's a problem for the patient in using that doctor, and so on. And this is not an arbitrary thing. I've heard instances of this early in the pandemic, that doctors were being threatened. Their careers were being threatened. They're still being threatened. Doctors who treat patients early are being threatened by their medical licensing boards against using these medications without evidence of harm. And so there's very great reason to understand that even doctors who are not functioning as doctors but as representatives of state agencies this way are not doing it voluntarily. And sure, they're being silent about it and saying, and choosing, I can't stand up for doing the right thing because I'd lose my job, I'd lose my career. Well, that might have flown in 2020. It doesn't fly today because I know dozens and dozens of doctors who've quit their jobs in their hospitals over these policies and have taken up telemedicine careers and are doing just fine and have the freedom to practice the medicine they want to. So, what was once a limitation that doctors couldn't find a way of getting out of now is no longer the case. And whether doctors see that or not, it's because, they're kind of stuck in their blinders largely and are just hoping it'll all go away. I don't think there's much they feel they can do about it.